Hey guys, it's Kat and I'm back today to do a 1 week 1 palette using the new BPerfect Carnival, the Antidote palette. So this is in collaboration with Stacey Marie, who is a makeup artist in the UK, I believe. And this is a massive palette. It's not usually something I would go for, but I saw this, I fell in love with the colors, and even though I much prefer on a daily basis to use something a lot smaller to do my daily makeup, like a duo or, you know, a quad or a quint. When I do like to play with makeup and play with color, I don't mind having a big palette as long as there's a lot of variety in there. You can create a lot of looks and there's not a lot of redundant overlapping shades, because when I see a lot of redundancy, I'm like, what's the point for the size? But if you have a lot of variety in there and you can create a whole abundance of different looks, I'm fine with it. So if you are new here and you haven't seen one of these types of reviews before, essentially what I like to do is I'll give you some information about the palette, show it to you, then I'll swatch it on my arm, and then I'll do a demo on my eyes so you can see sort of as I talk through how I find the formula. And then what I do is I check in over a period of a week or so, and I'll show you the looks I've created using the palette. Now, normally I would try to use all shades, but because this is actually a 45 shade palette, which is crazy, there's a lot going on. I'm not going to use all 45 shades. What I'll probably do is just do a look or two with each sort of color story. So I may as well talk about the layout quickly now, because some people find it confusing. I actually think it's really smart. But this is the 4th collaboration with Stacey Marie. So there's a lot of Carnival palettes around. The last one was really, really rainbow, and they just get bigger and bigger as the palettes get released. So this is the 45 pan, which is huge. And what I saw on Instagram, Stacey Marie was talking about in the last one, they laid the shades out sort of in color order, but people found that confusing. They didn't know how to group the shades. So with this one, it looks a little bit jumbled, but it's also organized in a way that you can group the colors quite easily. So even though this is a large palette, I see it as being more like 3 smaller palettes. So you have definitely a warmer, almost like sunset sort of color story there with corals, golds, mustards, burnt shades, sort of purpley pink shades. Then the middle is more of a nude, more neutral, cool toned, a little bit of mauviness. And then of course the last third is swampy greens, which are one of my favorite eyeshadow colors. So of course I love that, but these are the sort of shades I wear on a daily basis. This is what I like to wear if I inject a bit of color. And even though I'm not a huge pink sort of coral fan, I do like mustards and some burnt oranges as well. So this color story really spoke to me. But what they also did, which I thought was really smart, is if you look at this and you're quite confused, even if you do break it down into the thirds, what it was designed to do is to be broken down into little palettes of 9. So for example, you can see here, that could be one whole color look. Down here, one whole color look. Up there, a much more nude, cool tone look. Here's more mauvey. There's a little bit more swampy, a little bit more bright swampy, but then you can also overlap them. So if you just take this one here, that would work. If you take that one there, it would work. This is more of that romantic rosy sort of look. And then you have some brown sort of swampy colors as well. So if you like a color, so for example, I might go, I like this color and I want to do a look with it, but I don't know where to start. You can either just pair it with the shades around it or just use it in the sort of 9 pan color stories, and it should work every time. So I thought that was really smart. And like I said, they did that in response to the last palette sort of being laid out in sort of gradient color stories, and people found that a little bit hard to pair the colors. So yeah, I've seen people say this looks a little bit jumbled and they want to see it ordered, but I think the way they did it was really, really smart. So this palette, it contains 29 highly pigmented matte shades, 16 luxe creamy shimmers. To me personally, I feel like that's too matte heavy. I like a 50-50 split, and I also like shimmers to be broken down into different categories. So if it's all just one finished shimmer, I feel like it's a little bit limiting. I like to see some sparkly shimmers, some topper shimmers, some metallic shimmers, some more sheer or like satin finish shimmers. I like to see a variety, but this seems to just have 2 formulas in it. So this is available now. It's £39.95 from the BPerfect Cosmetics website. I picked this up from Glamradar, which is the Australian stockist. They launched this on the same day that it was launched on the BPerfect website, which was great. And it's $78.95 Australian dollars. Now that also qualifies for free shipping, and shipping is really, really fast. I think I ordered this one morning and I received it either the next day or the following morning. So Glamradar are fantastic and they stock heaps of brands. So if you're from Australia and you want to get hold of BPerfect Cosmetics and a whole bunch of other stuff, I do really like Glamradar. I've never had a bad experience with them. So yeah, so I was confident that this was going to arrive nice and safe, and it did. It does come in this box, which is the same look as the palette, all the details on the back, so you don't need to keep the box to get all the palette information, which is good. Also, this palette inside the box came bubble wrapped, so it was nice and secure. I think that's all the information I want to talk about. So let's have another quick look at the palette. It does come with a mirror, so if you want to use the mirror, some people don't like it. I don't mind it. This size though, probably not the most functional. If I do want to use the mirror, I just hold it like this with my hand. So when I do hold it up, I can use the palette and the mirror, but it is quite big and sort of clunky. But you do see your whole face. So you can literally do your whole face in this if you wanted to. Before I swatch this, I thought I would compare this palette size to other palettes that are around, so you can sort of have an idea of how big it is. It does contain a lot of shades and a lot of product. Each shade contains 1.5 grams, which is almost like a standard eyeshadow pan. So when you buy a single, they usually contain 1.5 to 2 grams each. So this is big, this is massive. Does it need to be this big? Probably not. I'm a big believer in having variety, but also smaller pans. So I would have liked to have seen this shade variety in maybe a smaller palette with maybe pans that are half the size, because realistically, even if you use this every day for a year, good luck hitting pan on many of them. You really don't need this much makeup. Also, I have heard that the quality of this is the same as the other Carnival palettes. I can't speak to that because I don't own them, but this is definitely the most popular BPerfect palette range, and I have heard really good things about the quality, so I'm hoping this lives up to my expectations. But in terms of size, I thought I would just hold this up compared to the Morphe James Charles palette, which I own and actually never used. So it is actually smaller. So the James Charles palette is thicker and also longer. So James Charles, there we go. So if you do have any sort of Morphe palettes or large Morphe palettes, this is actually a lot more compact. And compared to the Beauty Bay, this is the Berry 42 color eyeshadow palette. Again, this is probably similar. It's longer, but also narrower. So they're both sort of large and clunky, but then there's not one. Actually, I'd actually say that because this is thinner, it's probably easier to fit in drawers, whereas something that's square like this can be a little bit harder. So this is probably an easier format. And compared to a smaller eyeshadow palette, this is the Anastasia Beverly Hills Sultry palette. It's the standard format of their eyeshadow palette. So I thought I'll just compare. It's sort of like the equivalent of 2 and a bit of those. So yeah, it's big, but it's not huge. And also it's not added a lot of extra bulk. It's actually thinner than the Anastasia Beverly Hills palette. What I might do when I swatch these is actually swatch in the color stories. So I'll try to fit one of these sort of thirds on my arm at a time, and I'll swatch them across this way. So we can sort of see them in their color stories. We can see if there's any repetitive shades within that color story. And it shows you how the colors can work together a little bit better than if I just swatched it each row like that. All right, picking these up with my fingers, they're actually quite nice. I'll show you the pans after I've swatched them. There's not a lot of kick up. They're not very powdery, but they pick up a nice amount. And I always swatch on bare skin. So there's no primer on here, nothing. So this is how it works. So let's go with the first shade. It's not super bold and pigmented. Just gonna say, doesn't mean it won't apply better, but it's not the most pigmented matte. Shimmers are a lot better. Oh, that's a bit of a sad shade. Beautiful. All right, I'm just going to build those up a little bit to see if we can get more pigment on there, see how it sort of, the color looks. A little bit better. The peach, not the greatest. Oh, that's a cool color. Not applying super great, but it's like a bright, almost neon coral. Very cool. I'm going to build that one up a bit. I would love, oh, I'd love that in a lip color. Ooh, what was that? All right, I'm going to give those another chance. Build up a bit better. All right, just first impressions with the first color story. This is not my favorite color story out of the palette, so it's the one that I don't vibe with the most. These look very, very patchy. The mattes look quite, yeah, quite patchy, not super opaque. The shimmers look a lot nicer, but again, very matte heavy and not much variation with the texture in the shimmers. There is some, like I feel like with the berries, it gets very, very repetitive. But again, this might look a lot different when you've got it on your eyes. I do like the mustard. It doesn't look like it's a great formula, but we'll see. Let's try color story number 2. So starting from the top, these aren't too bad. I think the problem with the mattes, oh, shimmer, beautiful. That gold, gorgeous. Not that you can see Dove too much, but I'll just try to build it up a little bit more. It's pretty much my skin tone. From picking these up with my fingers, I'm sort of noticing that, okay, shimmer's really beautiful. I love that color. I'm noticing that the mattes, I think they almost don't swatch very well because they have a little bit of, I don't want to say creaminess or wetness to them, but they're not powdery. Often powdery mattes are what really swatch beautifully. These might apply great, but they do feel like they've got a little bit of almost wet, some creaminess to them. So the formula isn't very, very powdery. So that's why we're having a bit of a hard time swatching them. Ooh, interesting color. It's more of like an iridescent pearl shade. That's a lot sheerer than the other shimmers we've seen. So there is a little bit of variation in the formula. Okay, so that's the second color story. All right, third section, the greens. Do not let me down, greens. Let's give it a crack. Oh, it's not the best. It's not bad. These are, look, they're greeny shades, but they're not very punchy green. They're quite, yeah, muted greens. Oh, that's a nice one. Nice olive army type green. That one looks a bit sheer, so it's not super opaque. I might build this one up. As it stands, this looks very similar to that. This one's slightly more green, but very similar. All right, these next two are the ones that I'm excited for, so don't let me down. These are the greens that I love, these sort of chartreuse, beautiful greens. I love them. These sort of, I don't know, it's like yellowy, greeny tones. This is more of a mint. This is quite a different shade. Interesting. It's like a grey mint. Ooh, that's like a, got a true yellow there, and I'm going to build up this sort of foresty green. This one's actually called Antidote, so this is what the palette's named after. I would expect it to be a little bit more wow, but whatever. All right, last three. I love this green. I think it's gorgeous. It feels a little bit dry. That's a nice, again, just iridescent cream shade, and this beautiful army green. This looks a lot more bronze than this sort of silvery tone one, but there we go. I love these colors. I'm not crash hot on the formula. I've noticed that this one, for example, sort of just dusts away, so they do need a base to really grip those mattes. So we'll see how they apply as we go. So this is what the palette looks like after it's been swatched. So you can see there's no like gouges in it. There's no flaky kick up in the mattes. So they are pressed fairly firmly. They're not very, very flaky. So when I put my lip product on today and put my clothes on, I didn't expect to be filming this. Normally I would go straight to demoing the greens because they're the colors that I love the most. But I do think that with what I'm wearing today, the middle section is probably where I want to go, and I might just demonstrate some of these rosy tones. They might go well with my lips, so that's what I might focus on in the demo right now. All right, so what I currently have on my eyes is my MAC Paint Pot in Painterly. It's been on for a few hours, so I might just put a little bit more because it has completely dried. So I will have a little asterisk on the shade that I'm currently using, but I want to start with that peach shade. It's picking up pretty well. This swatched really badly, which is why I want to see how this applies on the eye. It actually is very pretty. So it definitely doesn't look as powdery and as patchy as it swatches. I am just starting this fairly lightly and building it up. But it's quite a pretty soft, like it's a soft sort of pastel-y peach, but it's actually applying quite nicely. I'm then going to use a matte mauvey shade just in the outer corner. Again, picks up quite nicely on the brush. I'm just using the same brush, and you can see the color distinction. So it's not just blending away and mixing completely with the peach. They blend nicely together, but you can see the color distinction, which I like. I'm going in with more of a flat brush and I'm using a shimmer shade. So just see how that applies. Again, really nice. So these tend to, they're not super bold. They're not really, really pigmented. They're not, you know, crazy. Look, they're really toned down shades. So I don't expect them to be super bold, but they are really easy to work with. And to be honest, I wasn't expecting it from the swatches. So going in with a brighter pink shade. This one's a little bit more subtle. This is more of a dusty baby pink. So again, it's not super, super bold, but it's there and it blends nicely. I'm just going to use a little bit of that shade just to sort of blend out this inner corner because I feel like it pairs really nicely with the shimmer that I used. Now this is a really soft, beautiful sort of pink, romantic kind of look. I think it's really gorgeous, but because in that 9-pan section that I've been drawing these colors from, there's also this chestnut shade and siren, which are these dark, sort of almost swampy, cooler toned browns. I want to see how they incorporate into this look. You can definitely use them as a liner, but I've just got a little bit on that same brush of the matte, that chestnut shade, and I just want to see how that shade pairs really softly with these romantic pinks and peaches that I've been using. So it just adds a little bit of smokiness, and I'm going to run a tiny bit of siren, same brush, just on the lower lash line to see how that one. This one applied quite sheerly does give the same effect as the matte, so I guess the difference would be mainly when you obviously build them up, but both shades give just a bit of depth to this sort of romantic look, and they do work well, even though they are more of that greeny toned brown. Just going back in with that original peach shade, and I'm just going to tap my brush off a little bit because I know that can be a bit powdery, but I'm just going to blend the edges a little bit, bring in a little bit more of that peachy shade on the outer part of the look. So that's brought back a lot of peachy tones, which I do like, and I want to go in with that oyster shade just on a pencil brush. It's that sort of pearly iridescent shade, and I just want to add that as the inner corner highlight. All right, I do have a little bit of mascara on that I had on prior to putting on the eyeshadow, but I want to just put a little bit of bronze eyeliner on my waterline. This is just by Urban Decay. It's the shade Double Life. I've got some MAC Extended Play mascara, which I had on the top lash line, but not on the bottom. So I'm just going to build that up a little bit because I'm not doing any liner on the top lash line. All right, so this is the first look. It's peachy, pinky, romantic, nudie. So this is the look overall. I think it does work. I actually preferred the eye look a lot more before I added the browns. I think it was just a little bit more fresh and fun with the peaches and the mauves and the pink. I think they were a really nice combination. So those colors definitely work well together. The browns do add a bit of smokiness, so you can take that look from like day to night. And the browny green toned sort of interesting shades, they do pair nicely with the tones around them. So they do work. I just wish I sort of stopped before the browns and had a much more fresh, sort of vibrant look. All right, I'm back with look number 2 and I've gone green, which is exactly why I wanted to use this palette. So the little color story I wanted to play with today is that top 9 pan here. I didn't use all shades, but I did use most of them. So all over the lid, just the top lid on the same base, so the MAC paint pot, I used this shade here, which is like a shimmery grass green. It was very pretty. It applied really nicely. I then tried to use this shade on the lower lash line and in the crease, but it didn't apply very well. And you can see it's got a little bit of hard pan on it. So this one's a firmer eyeshadow. I remember it not swatching very well. I'll have to try to like remove that hard pan just by using a bit of sticky tape or agitating the pan. But it really didn't transfer very well. So it was just gave a slight murkiness. It didn't do much at all. So then I went in with this brighter shade in the crease and on the lower lash line, which gave it a little bit more brightness. You'll see when I zoom in. Then to add a little bit more color and play with a few more shades, I used this matte just in the outer corner and on lower lash line. So it added a little bit more of that true sort of typical green color to it rather than that sort of mustardy green. And then the last thing I did was I took this lighter shimmery shade and just tapped it on the center of the lid for a bit of brightness just on the center part. So I didn't do it as an inner corner highlight. I just did it as almost, yeah, brightness on the middle part of the lid. So that's a look close up. You can definitely see there's a lot of that murky, yellowy, mustardy color from that chartreuse matte. And there's a little pop of more vibrant green from that other more like grass green shade. All right, look number 3, and this is a good example of why I don't like to review eye products and lip products at the same time, because it's too much. I look like a clown. For today's eye look, I decided to focus on this part of the palette, particularly this 9 pan section here, because I wanted to try these two. They didn't swatch very good. I do like musty sort of yellow colors, so I wanted to really try them. So I wanted to try this area. In the future, when I do use shades like this, I think I would actually prefer to pair it with these sort of colors, because I feel like forcing it with the burnt oranges and the burnt sort of dark plummy colors, it's a bit much for me. I actually much prefer to neutralize it a little bit with these sort of nude, cooler toned and brown shades. I just feel like this looks a little bit clownish. Anyway, I didn't have the best of time. So what I did on my eyes today was I originally put this mustardy shade in the outer corner and sort of blended it into the crease a little bit. Didn't really stick. It was a little bit patchy. It didn't blend on nicely. It needed to be like packed on quite a lot. Then I wanted to compare it to this shade here, which swatched horribly on the arm. So I put that on the inner corner, and realistically, there's not that much of a difference. Yes, this is lighter in here, but the tone is pretty much the same. I do feel like this shade is better performing in pigmentation. Not great blendability, it's not good, but neither is this one. And I feel like you can get this effect if you just apply this a bit more lightly, which is easy to do because you need to really pack it on to build up the shade. So these are a bit redundant, to be honest. Then I went in with the shade Fawn and just put that in the very outer corner to add some depth. I did the same thing on the lower lash line because it was just looking like tangerine matte. So that one did perform a little bit better. And then I took this shade here and I used it as an eyeliner. I didn't want to add too much burnt color because, again, I feel like, look, I wanted to keep it fairly light and bright, and I just don't want to, drag it down with a lot of color. So I made that the liner. Didn't apply very well. Quite patchy, quite dry, a little bit flaky, so it's not a great liner shade. Then I took this middle shade here and just popped it on the inner corner. I feel like in this quad, it would have been nice to have a brighter sort of like gold or a brighter light peach or something. None of these really worked as highlight shades. This area here is lacking all highlight shades. So even though the colors do work well together, you would want to like dip into other shades to add a little bit more dimension because it's all mid-toned or quite dark. So yeah, don't love this quad. It's not great performing. The best performing shade was a shimmer, and the mattes were just a little bit stubborn and didn't end up looking very good. So my hesitation that I had with how they swatched on the arm is sort of reflective of how they're starting to apply on the eye, which I'm not happy about. The overall look is fine. It gets there. I just didn't have a good time with it. All right, so hopefully you can see that there's that pretty peach shade in here. There's that zest shade there. There's not that much of a difference. I was really hoping the zest shade would be more mustardy, but it definitely applies more tangerine. And then I have that little bit of orange in the outer corner for a bit of depth, and that sort of burgundy shade as a liner, and the liner's not fantastic. You can see it didn't apply very opaquely. I did try to build it up. And I did apply it with a liner brush. I didn't apply it wet. I just wanted to see how it applies dry. Most nicely pigmented dark eyeshadows I can wear as a liner, no problem, but this one was just a little bit of a struggle. The overall look isn't bad. It's just not that flattering, and it wasn't that easy to work with. All right, quick update. I'm not sure if you can tell because this lighting is really shit and I just did it really, really fast. I sort of modified it because I didn't like the look. This is a bit better in person, but essentially what I did was I took this shade here, Elixir, which is like a cooler toned bronze, I guess you would say, and I put that all over the lid, and then I also took this cool tone brown and put it in the outer corner just to sort of neutralize it. So I still have the sort of tangerine stuff going on around the outside, but the lid is not as sort of orangey looking because it was looking a bit unwearable. All right, hopefully you can see close up a little bit better. There's definitely that sort of more browny shimmer on the lid and in the outer corner, that more neutral brown, and you've still got the tangerine color in the crease. All right, after yesterday's look, which I was not a fan of, I didn't like the effect of it. I didn't like how it performed. There was not much that I liked about that look. I tolerated it after I applied the browns over the top, and it sort of made it more of a grungy, browny, orangey sort of look. That was okay, but as it was at the start, I wasn't a fan. So after that, I decided to go for something that's a little bit more in my comfort zone. These are the colors that I wear on a daily basis. They're easy to apply. I know they work really well with my tones and they don't clash with red lips, and I am testing out lip stains this month, so most of them are red, which is why I'm sort of rocking a red lip every day, and it's going to clash a little bit with this palette, which is unfortunate, but it's hard reviewing two things at once. Anyway, I decided to go for this section of the palette today because that again is sort of my tones that I like to wear on a daily basis. I did start with this shade up here in the crease. It looks like a sort of rosy caramel shade, like quite a neutral shade. It's not too warm, it's not too cool, it's not too pink, it's not too brown, but it looked very, very pink on me. This almost looked quite peachy, quite rosy, so I ended up covering that one with this shade here and just sticking to the warmer tone browns because I feel like that was the effect that I was after. So I've sort of layered those two in the crease. I blended it out a little bit with this cream shade because they were, even though they weren't super opaque, I think because I used a fairly big fluffy brush, it sort of went a bit higher to my brow bone than I wanted, so this helped it sort of bring it back down. Then I used this shade all over the lid. I think this is a beautiful shade. It's got more of a, it looks very, very silvery and very taupe, but it does have a warmth to the base. So it's quite a neutral shade in my opinion. It's not too warm, it's not too cool. And you can see it doesn't look silvery or grey on the lid. It just sort of looks quite neutral, which I like. Then on the lower lash line and in the outer corner a little bit, I added some of this brown. And then I added this sort of champagne gold on my inner corner and lower lash line to add a little bit more brightness. Again, I feel like the best performing shades were the shimmers. They were a lot more intense. They were easy to apply. It didn't require any building up. They just applied really nicely. Oh, and I did use a different base today. I used the Urban Decay Primer Potion just to see if it affects anything. I had no issues with longevity or creasing with these, but I don't usually get creasing. So I've had no issues with these fading down during the day or any creasing problems, but I just thought I'd change up the base just to see if it makes a difference anyway. But yeah, I really like these. They performed fairly well. Definitely a lot better than the ones I was using yesterday, and I'll zoom in and show you the look. I did finish this off with a bit of brown liner on my waterline, a little bit of a brown wing, but you can definitely see that sort of taupey shade. It looks just more like a cool toned brown. So it's got a bit of a cool shimmer, but it does effectively look like a brown. You've got that nice pop of light sort of gold champagne there, and then all the browns worked fine. I think the darkest brown that I used was quite light. I was expecting it to add a little bit more depth to the lash line and outer corner, but it just didn't have much pigmentation. But there are darker browns in the palette that I could always deepen it with. So far, this is definitely the look that I would recreate most frequently. So I do like that they have that middle panel where you can get some nice everyday softer looks, as well as the bookends that are a little bit more fun and interesting. All right, look number 5, and obviously I've gone into the green section again. I've gone into this bottom section here. So essentially what I did, I took the chartreuse, just chucked that in the crease. I took this color here, which is, it's like an old gold. So it's gold with a slight olive hint to it. If you just paired this with a brown, it would just look like a standard gold, but there is a slight olive tone to it. So I put that all over the lid. I put the yellow on the lower lash line because I just wanted to see how the yellow performed by itself. Then I used this sort of cool tone highlight shade on the inner corner. It was looking very yellow, so I wanted to throw in some of this green, so that's in the outer corner. It does happen to be a little bit dry, and it has a look, it's not as, some of these orangey shades were quite gritty, I would say. This one was quite dry and a little bit powdery and didn't really adhere very well to the eye, but it wasn't gritty. And then I took the Antidote shade and used that as a liner. Similar to when I used that sort of burgundy shade as a liner, it wasn't super opaque, but I don't think it was as patchy as that burgundy. So I am consistently finding that even though the formula isn't fantastic, I am finding the green section a little bit better than the dryness and the sort of grittiness and the patchiness that you can get on this section of the palette. So this is a look close up. You can see the chartreuse shade in the crease. It doesn't look that much different to the yellow. I didn't put any primer on my lower lash line, so the fact that the yellow did adhere at all was quite good. It's not the worst. Again, it's a little bit dry, but it's not the worst color. All right, I'm back with what I think is look number 6, and the last section of the palette I needed to use was this one down here. I will also do a couple of other looks where I just use the palette however I want and I don't stick to color stories, because there are like some browns that I want to mix with more greens. So there's, yeah, other ways that I want to use it. So I'll probably do another couple of looks doing that. I sort of cheated a little bit today. I looked at this and I have the same issue that I had when I was using this, where it's all sort of dark colors. There's no brightness to it. And I really wanted to delve into this like neon coral shade. That's one that I found really interesting when I swatched it. And I wanted that to be the main look, but I didn't want it to be toned down with a lot of the berries. And I wanted it to sort of stand out against something that's a little bit more nude. So what I actually did was I used this shade here all over the lid, which is not in that section. Then I used the neon coral shade and I sort of flicked it out almost like a wing. I just used a pencil brush. And then I ran this shade on the lower lash line with a touch of the purple. The main reason I wanted to use this one was because it swatched horribly. It was one of the worst swatching shades, so I thought I wanted to see how that applies. And I wanted to use a little bit of the purple because it is fairly unique to this palette. So that's what I've got on my eyes. Oh, and then I also tapped a little bit of gold on the center because I felt like I didn't use enough of this. So gold, coral, pink, purple over the top of this sort of champagne nudie shade. All right, I actually really like this look. It's very pretty. You can see that coral is quite vibrant. I didn't even build it up too much. I just used my Urban Decay primer potion. I didn't even flick out the primer, so this sort of wing is just not on primed skin whatsoever. But you can see you can build it up fairly brightly. It's not super, super opaque, but it definitely works and you definitely get the impact that you want. And from past looks, these don't fade throughout the day. So I feel like this is going to be a good test if it stays quite bold, because I'll be able to notice if it fades down. So yeah, I like that color. I think it's a beautiful pop of color. It wasn't the most blendable, but it wasn't patchy or gritty either. So yeah, it was fine. And then I've got that soft pink and I've got a little bit of purple just rubbed right into the lash line. So you can see that sort of area looks a little bit more purple, just because I wanted to distinguish it a little bit more from the coral. The pink, even though it swatches really badly, again, I don't prime under my eye, so there's no primer there. It applies a lot better with a brush than it did swatch with a finger, which, you know, happens with some eyeshadows. So it's just a nice sort of rosy soft pink. All right, I'm back with another look. It's kind of a similar design as yesterday, I've realized. I don't know, maybe I'm vibing this shape and this sort of placement of eyeshadows. Oh well, but today I'm going rogue. I'm choosing shades that I want to play with, and I decided to choose sort of some polar opposite shades so you can see that the shades do mingle well. I think the good thing about these warm toned greens is they do work well with warm toned eyeshadows. So because they're not really frosty, they're not really blue toned, even blue toned would work with these. They work well together is my point. Anyway, I decided to use this sort of minty green shade. So I've got that on the inner part of the lid and also in the inner corner. I transitioned it with this shade here. So this sort of dusty mauvey rose shade. So that's what you see on the middle part and also on the lower lash line. And then I used this shade on the outer corner. Now, this is Aubergine. It's one of the darkest red tone shades. These are the ones that swatched really badly, and I want to see how they applied on the eye. So that's what's in the outer corner with a burgundy liner. Now, I'll talk about that in a second. Let's zoom in. So this is how I generally like to wear berries, as a little bit of a deepening color rather than, you know, mixed with oranges and yellows and golds and, you know, pinks like the sort of area was suggesting. I sort of like it when it's a little bit more neutral and then it's just a pop of berry. Look, these performed fine. Again, the shimmer was a little bit easier to work with, a little bit more intense. And as you can see, this is supposed to be the darkest, one of the darkest berry shades, and it's very, very light. So even though it applied fine, it wasn't patchy. It was a little bit annoying to blend, but that's just the nature of the color and the fact that it's quite dark. Even though I tried to build this up, I couldn't get it anywhere close to the color in the pan. And I just thought I'd show you as a comparison, if you really wanted to get this sort of tone of color, you might need to apply it wet, which would be hard to blend. It really isn't as pigmented as it looks. If I just looked at this on the eye, I would think I'd be using more like this shade or this shade. But because I'm reaching for one of the darker shades and it gives me an effect that looks more like this, I don't love it. I also had to put a burgundy liner with it because I was hoping to use this shade more as like a defining liner effect, but I just couldn't get it dark enough. And from past experience, I know they're quite patchy. So I had to use a burgundy liner to sort of shape the look and give the sort of effect that I was after. All right, we're back with what I'm going to call the last look of this video. Not because I can't create a lot more looks, it's just that I really like this look and I think it's a good one to end on. So what I did today was I mainly delved into some of these and the browns. So on the inner part of the lid, I used this sort of taupey bronzy shade. On the outer part of the lid, I used this sort of dark cooler tone green. Then I used this dark green on the outer corner and the lower lash line. And then I mixed this mustard color with this swampy green to sort of blend it out. So there's a little bit of a more yellow toned blending. And then to add a little bit more brightness and green, I went in with that sort of grassy green shimmer shade just on the inner half of my lower lash line. So the top is a lot cooler and the bottom is a little bit more vibrant green. So I really love this look. It's definitely the type of greens that I like to wear. It has a little bit of smokiness, a little bit of grunginess, a little bit of vibrance, different textures going on. So yeah, it's a bit of a mishmash of those colors, but I really like how it worked out. And this is definitely one of my favorite looks I've created in this review. All right, so the time has come to give my thoughts on this palette. So what I like to do in my conclusions is give pros and cons and just some overall points and let you know what I think about it overall. So let's start with the pros. The pros of this palette, in my opinion, is definitely the variety here. You don't often see so much variety in one palette. Of course, it's like a 45 pan palette, so you expect a lot of variety. And probably for 45 pans, you probably expect a little bit more, but it is what it is. But what I really like about this is not only do you have the greens and you have a nice variety of different greens and different undertones and different textures, you have some berries and some warm tones, but you also have the shades that are sort of like the bridge between the two. So like when I used the mint and the berry, you definitely can take colors from either side and use this middle section to sort of bridge the gap between them. So I think it's a really smart layout, and I really like the way it's structured. So you do have, again, the sort of thirds in the different color stories, but then you can break them down into sections. And like this section here, I'm looking at this 9-pan section here, and I feel like that would make such an interesting sort of modern romantic pinky mauve tone with a pop of green. So there's some really cool color stories in here, and I really like the way it's been laid out. I think it's a lot better than if they just went from like lightest to darkest in the different color stories. I think the way they've done this is really, really, really smart. Now, unfortunately, I think that's all I have to say about the really positive points about this. Now, there's good points about it, like, you know, the packaging is fine for a palette this size. It's fairly sleek, it's fairly functional, there's a nice quality mirror. So there's some nice points about it. But I think overall, the more I've been using this, the more I've been disappointed by the quality. So let's get on to some cons. One very, very minor con about the layout is that I think the 9 chunks work really well on this side of the palette. And if you start overlapping the sides of the palette, they work really well. But just this section alone, I think it's very, very one note. So if you were to go with the yellows and the oranges or the berry tones, you will need to jump over to other sections to incorporate a bit more brightness to it, because it's all quite mid-toned, and it gives you sort of like a one-note look if you don't jump to some of these brighter shades to sort of lift certain areas. So I feel like they should have put a couple of more highlight shades or lighter shades in here to really make that format work all over the palette. Probably the biggest con for me is the formula. I had actually heard that the mattes were really lovely quality, and I personally don't see it. I feel like the mattes, especially the berry mattes, are very, very dry and almost gritty. They do build up color, so you can definitely see the color on the eye if you build them up, but at the same time, they never get to full opacity, and some of the shades feel a little bit gritty. So when you're applying them or touch swatching them, there's a little bit of grittiness. They're not finely milled and really, really smooth to blend, and that is translated on the eye. You can definitely get them to blend. They don't sit on the eye patchy, which is great, but when you're trying to blend out the shades, it's not a nice, even, easy blend. There's a little bit of a fight to make them blend. So the mattes weren't my favorite. They also sealed up after I swatched them once with my finger. So I still have a few pans that I have been using, and they have a little bit of hard pan on them. It's not that big a deal. You can either just use a brush to sort of rub it off, which is what I've just been doing organically as I've used the palette. But I can see some hard pan like on this shade here that's not going away. You can sort of see it catching the light, and also some hard pan there you can see catching the light. I'm going to have to go in with some sticky tape and just touch the pan, and it will lift the hard pan. Now, if you're not familiar with what hard pan is, it's essentially when oils or any moisture from like your fingers or your brush seal over the pan. It almost, it creates a layer that becomes hard. It's a hard pan, and it's really hard to pick up the product because it's got this almost seal over the top. And it can happen as simply as oils from your fingers if you're touching the pan, or if you use a brush, for example, a clean brush, go in, pick up product, put it on your primer, then you go in again, and that little amount of primer left on your brush transfers onto the pan and it seals it up. Now again, hard pan I find is common with cheaper ingredients. I find better performing eyeshadows and like more refined, finely milled eyeshadows don't get hard pan as easily as some cheaper ones do. So it's not the end of the world, but it is annoying and it's something to note. Also, it's an indication that you can't use these wet. So often there's eyeshadows that they boast about being able to use wet or dry, and that means that you can actually put a wet brush into the pan and it won't ruin or cause hard pan. If you were to do that with these mattes, I can guarantee that they will ruin the pans because it just can't handle moisture. So I'm not sure if my expectations were quite high because firstly, I've experienced some really good mattes in my collection, but also I heard really good things specifically about the mattes in this palette and the palettes in this Carnival collection. So maybe my expectations were too high, but they work, they get on the eye, they give you the effect, but it's a little bit more work than what I usually like. I do think the shimmers are better. Now they do sort of gouge out. They almost have like a dimethicone wetness to them. So when you do put your brush in, they can cause little gouges. So they're not very powdery shimmers. They're more of that creamy, wet powder, if that makes sense. If you're familiar with eyeshadows, you might know what I'm talking about. Now that formula is generally really good at getting a pigmented eyeshadow on the eye, and these are really good at transferring onto the eye. I've had no issues with making these look bold or having to build them up. So the shimmers, in my opinion, definitely perform better. The thing that really frustrates me about that though is that you can see by catching the light, there's really not many shimmers. So this is a predominantly matte palette, and that's a formula that I like the least in this palette. So I would have loved to have seen more shimmers because I really feel like we're lacking with some shades. Like there's no dark green shimmers here. So you can see there's a dark green, some dark sort of greeny shades here, but there's no dark green shimmer to go alongside those. It would have been really nice to have like a jade green shimmer. And again, there's some really orangey sort of tones and gold tones of shimmer, but there's no berry shimmers really. So I feel like they have put a lot of variety in the mattes, but the shimmers are really lacking. And what I would have liked to have seen, not only more shimmers, but also different finishes of shimmers. So the only real differences you might get is your traditional sort of bold shimmer, and then maybe a highlight, slightly sheerer shimmer. I would have liked to have seen more variety within the shimmer texture. You can get some sparkly shimmers, you can get some foiled shimmers, you can get some standard shimmers, you can get some duochrome, you can get some transparent, you can get a lot of different finishes with shimmers, and this was all just sort of one note. So there wasn't enough shimmers and there wasn't enough variety within the shimmers. So even though this is a big palette with a lot of different colors in it and a lot of different color stories and a lot of variety, I would have loved to have seen more variety in the texture because I feel like texture can really change a look, whereas this all just felt sort of one note in the texture department. And you know, some people love colors and they don't care about texture. For me, I actually prefer different textures over a large variety of colors because a lot of these colors anyway started looking very, very similar because they had the similar finish. If I had more satin finish and duochrome and sparkle versus, you know, all matte and shimmer, there would have been a lot more fun and interesting looks I could create using this palette. Another con is just the sheer amount of product you get. So even if you did want to keep the same 45 shades, that's fine. I just would have liked to have seen the pans be like half the size. So you have the shade variety, but just less bulk and it cheaper, because this is not a cheap palette. You're paying for the bulk. And if you've tried to pan an eyeshadow palette, you know that you don't need large pans unless you're a makeup artist. But if you're a makeup artist, I wouldn't recommend this quality because it's not makeup artist quality. So yeah, overall, I'm not in love with this palette. Do I regret buying it? Probably, only because it was quite expensive. If this was a lot cheaper, like if it was say like 20 or 30 Australian dollars, you could go, okay, you can't expect that much from the quality because it's really, really cheap. But at nearly 80 Australian dollars, I don't feel like the quality is worth the price tag. The best thing about this, in my opinion, is the color story, because it is, in my opinion anyway, quite unique. That you can create a lot of different looks from it, and I would love to see more brands sort of merge these swampy greens with these sort of cool toned mauvey nudes, and then a little bit of warmth and like a fun coral. I think this color story speaks to me on so many different levels. I just wish that a brand like maybe Natasha Denona did it in mini pans, because I know Natasha Denona would put a lot of different finishes in this and it would just perform a lot better. I'm on the lookout for this color story from different brands, but unfortunately, I think I just heard too much hype from this formula. So this had so much potential with the color story, but I just feel like they pulled back on the quality and the variety of finishes to cut costs. And I feel like this is the perfect example of choosing quantity over quality, which is a real shame because this color story is gorgeous. All right, thank you so much for watching. If you've tried this palette or any other BPerfect palettes, let me know what you think about it. It's just a shame because this was the last purchase before my no buy. So now I'm not buying anything until the end of the year, and this it's my last purchase was a disappointment. So I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.